Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for a conversation with Ed Tarkington and Jill McCorkle for the release of Ed's new book, The Fortunate Ones. My name is Talia, and I am the events manager here at Flyleaf. Before we begin tonight's event, I'll take just a quick moment to highlight some of our upcoming events, just in case any of y'all are interested. So we are on a bit of a South theme at the moment. We have Ed's event tonight, obviously, and then next Tuesday we're hosting Thomas Healy, who has a book coming out called Soul City, which is about an attempt in the 1970s to create like a racially equitable utopia community in Clan Country, North Carolina. It's sort of a forgotten little piece of North Carolina history, and so that should be really interesting. And then the following next Thursday, we are hosting Denise Hines, who's a local author who has a book, The Brief and True Report of Temperance Flowerdew, which is a novel that describes the life of the first wife of two of colonial Virginia's governors in the, I guess, early history of Virginia. So that one should be interesting as well. So those are a few Southern themed events. And if you'd like to see our full lineup, you can click Flyleaf Books right above our faces where it says, or has our little logo, and you can see our full lineup. And we're adding events all the time. If you'd like to support Flyleaf and our guests, please keep in mind that you can buy a signed copy of The Fortunate Ones. You can click the link just below our faces for that. And we are currently closed for browsing, but we're planning to reopen on Tuesday, February 2nd. So you can order online in the meantime. You can call us when we're open. Sorry. And then beginning next week, you can shop in person. All right, I will go ahead and introduce our authors. North Carolina native Jill McCorkle is the author of beloved Southern fiction, including the novels Life After Life and most recently Hieroglyphics. She was a Briggs Copeland Lecturer in Fiction at Harvard, where she also chaired the Department of Creative Writing. And she is currently a faculty member of the Bennington College Writing Seminars and is affiliated with the MFA program at NC State. And Ed Tarkington's debut novel, Only Love Can Break Your Heart, was an Indies Introduced selection, an Indie Next pick, a Book of the Month Club main selection, and a Southern Independent Booksellers Association bestseller. A regular contributor to chapter16.org, his articles, essays, and stories have appeared in a variety of publications, including the Nashville Scene, Memphis Commercial Appeal, Knoxville News Sentinel, and LitHub. He lives in Nashville, Tennessee, and his new novel is The Fortunate Ones. All right, I am going to minimize my audio and video and let you all have a chat. And then when you're ready for questions, just let me know and I'll pop back up to ask you those. If anybody has a question while the authors are talking, you're welcome to use the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of your screen or drop your question in the chat and we will get to it as soon as our authors finish their conversation. All right, y'all have the floor. Thank you for joining us.
Books. Is that me?
You sound fantastic.
Is that better?
You're still echoing a little, but I think it was better.
Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you.
Hey, Jill, do you have headphones by any chance? I've just muted your audio so that we don't get that echo for just a second while you find headphones. It's probably just audio feedback issue. So we're going to try headphones and see if that makes a difference.
All right, here we go.
Let me turn her microphone on. Let's see. It's not letting me turn your microphone on. Hold on 1 minute. Jill, I'm going to close your video and then I'll re-prompt you to share your audio and video. Just give me 1 second. Sorry about that. It's
No
technical
worries.
difficulties. We're all used to it at this point.
Indeed. While we're waiting, I just want to say thank you, Flyleaf, for having me come talk to you. I'm super excited. There she is.
Okay.
We
Just-
got you. You sound
All right.
much better now. All right. I will go away now and let y'all have your conversation. I'm glad we got that sorted out.
Thank
me
you, Sally.
I am so sorry.
No worries.
It's doing, I'm hearing myself a little echo.
Yeah.
Are you hearing it?
I hear a little one, but it's much better. I think we can roll with this.
Okay. We definitely will. I don't sound like an alien now.
I thought it was kind of cool.
There is so much to talk about here. Terrific novel. Great to see you had and be here. I am echoing.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way I can turn myself off so that
You could try to
lower my volume?
lower your volume, and that might work.
Can y'all still hear me?
That's
Yeah,
perfect.
you're good.
Oh, good. Can you still hear me now?
Yeah. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, you're good.
I'll turn it up when you're talking.
It's actually working fine right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. There's just so much here that I'm excited to talk about. It's in some ways a love story. It's been compared, drawing comparisons to Gatsby, which I think the connection between Charlie and a Nick Carraway type narrator, and we'll get to that. But I just want to open by saying, you take on these huge discussions of class differences, race differences. You provide us a time capsule of this country from Vietnam up to 9/11 and on. There was something on every page that I found myself marking. Things that made me laugh with such strange truth, like somebody who goes off to college as Chuck and comes back as Charles. And you tell us so much there. But there's also just so much about roles in family, which I found particularly touching, especially you've written a lot about motherhood in this novel. So I'm just going to stop there and listen to you maybe read a little bit and then circle back to some of these broader topics. I think this novel is so timely right now in many ways.
Thank you so much, Jill. And I have to just say, this is really a treat for me and an honor to be able to have a conversation with you. I've been such an admirer of your work for many years and just feel kind of like being able to sit down and see your face even through a screen and talk about my work. Just, it's sort of surreal for me because, you're one of the people that made me, kind of want to be a writer way back in the day. And thank you for your wonderful work and just your incredible graciousness. Hearing you say those nice things about my book is just, touches my heart. For folks who don't know anything about the book, it's a story about, it begins with the narrator, Charlie, as an adult, probably around 40, and he's in the Army at the time, and it's sort of near the end of the Iraq War, about 2014, and he discovers while he's delivering a casualty notification to a family whose son has been killed in the war, just by it happens to come on the television while he's there, that the U.S. Senator from Tennessee, a guy named Arch Cray, has died by suicide. And what Charlie reveals in his reaction to this news is that he had at one time been very close to this man, Arch Cray. And so what then ensues after is the story of how they came to know each other as boys, Charlie being a boy of a single mother who was a runaway because her family was not willing to support as a teen, unwed mother, and lives in the kind of rough circumstances before his mother manages to get him into a Tony private school in Nashville on the other side of town. And there he comes into the world of people who are extraordinarily wealthy, and in particular, Arch, who befriends him and becomes kind of his way into this world, which he both loves and despises. And the simultaneous attraction and resentment that he feels for people who have a level of prosperity that he could never have imagined, and just kind of take it for granted, sort of fuels his journey through life, where he has kind of a parting and then a return, and a parting and a return. He can't seem to let go. And I thought I'd just share a couple passages, one from the first part of the novel, where Charlie describes what it meant to him when he first heard the news about Arch's death, and then one a little bit later on. This is from this is the beginning of the first chapter. There's a prologue in the novel, and then the chapter 1. When I learned what had happened to Arch, what he'd done, when I saw him there on the TV screen in the living room of a dead soldier's family and wept, I thought not of what he'd become, but rather of a boy I once knew, with a mop of golden hair and a golden smile, and a sense of certitude so strong it spilled onto everyone around him. And I thought of the boy I had once been, aimless and timid, and how when that magnificent boy turned his light toward me, I fed on that light, and in doing so became transformed. So from there, Charlie, sort of unfolds his story and how he grows in friendship with Arch, and becomes really enamored, not just with Arch's wealth and prosperity, but especially with his charisma and his sense of certainty, and the sort of confidence that he has, carrying him along through all parts of his life. Events incur which cause them to part, and then kind of have a falling out, and then come back together, and they're in their 30s or late 20s when they reconnect. And around this time, Arch has now become very, very successful in finance. He's married the girl that they both loved, and he's preparing to enter politics, and he's decided to launch his career in politics by running for mayor of Nashville. And Charlie, in observing all this, sort of notes the kind of contradiction in a guy like Arch, presenting himself as a champion of the common man. So I'm going to read just another short passage from there. How did a guy like Arch Cray, born into wealth, educated privately from pre-K through graduate school, married to the daughter of a billionaire, as handsome as a film star, with family ties going back almost to Jamestown, become a man of the people? After all, the people were the ones who shopped at Walmart, who spent their lives traveling back and forth between backbreaking jobs and weary inertia at home, who ended up being forced to live off disability and Medicaid benefits. How on earth could the people see a guy who lived on Bellamy Boulevard as their champion? There is nothing in this world to which people connect more willingly in uncertain times than the appearance of genuine certainty. If there was one true thing that could be said about Arch, it was this: he seemed so sure of himself that people couldn't help but believe in him.
Oh, wow. Yes. And he is very sure of himself.
Indeed.
Charlie is such an endearing character in so many ways. And we see him time and time again pulled into very difficult situations. Early in childhood, he has a very good friend, Terrence, who's Black, and living there in the same neighborhood. And then he ends up pretty early in the novel moving from that situation to where he's with Arch, and then, you know, living in the home with the twins, Jamie and Vanessa. And the twins are also interesting because I kind of felt like Vanessa and Jamie split apart and sort of represented the whole of a certain kind of upbringing. Did you have that in mind when you were drawing those characters?
Yes. No, I think that, you know, that is one of those things, just your saying it makes me realize, okay, maybe that was what I was thinking, but I wasn't thinking about that specifically. I was thinking more along the lines of, you know, wanting to, you know, create characters that I felt were real, and maybe I didn't think of them as two parts of the same whole, but I certainly thought of them as kind of opposite sides of a spectrum, of where some people who have, you know, kind of, who start way ahead on the chessboard, you know, sees all of those opportunities and feel a certain amount of pressure to make the most of them, and you know, both entitlement and obligation to, you know, go to an Ivy League school and you know, go, you know, have fabulous success professionally in, you know, very high-paying fields, and then go into politics and philanthropy and you know, society. And then the other side of the spectrum is the kid who just can't quite get it right and screws up all the time and never really learns his lesson, because there's always somebody there to bail him out of his messes, because people don't want to step on his parents' toes because they're influential and have a lot of money.
And yet I had a great deal of sympathy for Jamie. And I don't want to give away too much. And this is one of those novels that I could easily spit out a spoiler, and I don't want to do that. But I will say that even though he's a minor character in so many ways, he's powerful on the page and memorable, and as is their mother and also Charlie's mother. So there you also have these two women leading very different lives just by way of money, class, and you're just doing so much with the differences in class and the way people are either let in or let out. And I kept thinking that, combined with the politics that you really take us into the inside world. And there were times when I thought, okay, so does the end justify the means? And because there's a lot in this novel about truth and truth-telling. There's that great quote that one of his teachers gives him early on: truth is hidden, but nothing is more beautiful than the truth. And we hear that quote early on, and we know that it makes an impact on Charlie. And then it seems time and time again, he's confronted with finding the truth, and it gets more and more complicated as the novel progresses.
Well, it's, you know, I'm really glad to hear you say that you found Charlie empathetic, because I struggled. You know, I'm not really, I'm not very much, I guess if I'm like Charlie at all, it's sort of the side of myself that I don't like, in terms of his, you know, bitterness at the outset of the novel, and the sort of, you know, relentlessness with which he breaks down everyone around him. But what I think, you know, when you talk about the search for truth, what I wanted to bring across was that the truth that he's looking for, that he's not seeing, is as much about himself as it is about anyone that he's, you know, kind of judging. And I didn't want any of the people. One thing that was on my mind, mostly when I write a story, I just try to make up these people and try to make them come to life on the page and not think too much about what I'm trying to say. But the one thing I did think consciously about was that I didn't want there to be anyone in the story who was all good or all bad, which is kind of why I pulled that quote from Warren for the epigraph, that while Charlie sees all these flaws in people who are very, very privileged, he exhibits a lot of flaws himself. And you brought up Terrence, and I think kind of really the first big compromise, the sort of sharp kind of moral cowardice in Charlie's life is letting go of Terrence and kind of betraying him to go into this world of extreme privilege, which is 100% white, and at that time, and probably still, but much more so at that time, very cavalier about bigotry and acceptance of the status quo, in which the only brown faces that people see belong to people who are in positions of servitude. And see, Charlie is not any better than anyone else in the novel, the way that I conceived him. And some of the people that he has the sharpest criticism for, his mother, his eventual stepfather, the mother of his friends, who comes across kind of in her first appearance as being a pretty awful, pathetic person. I wanted to show by the end of the novel, as he grows into adulthood and begins to mature in his reflections, that they weren't all bad either. And that maybe he was a little unfair in his judgments of them as a boy. And that, we as humans are really complicated creatures. And if you want everything to be black and white, you're going to be in a pretty unhappy place. And he's got to find some peace with, the complexity of the people in his life. I think Arch more so than anyone, who he both loves and resents.
Right.
So that was kind of what was on my mind.
No, Charlie definitely has a long, difficult journey.
Mm-hmm.
And again, just right up front, we know that he has distanced himself from Terrence by just being tapped to step into this this other world, this very elite world, foreign to where he has been. And then, within a few pages, when he's meeting Arch for the first time, Arch is standing there reading a copy of Black Boy for school, and Charlie says, "What are you reading?" And Arch says, "Propaganda." And every hair on your neck goes up, because you're waiting to see what Charlie will do, and Charlie does nothing. So Charlie, he's witnessing just event after event, and he is reacting. I had hope in him, that he was absorbing and learning, because really his mother and the aunt left back in the neighborhood are his better role models, and the teacher, that one teacher.
Yes, and it's interesting. I've told people when they ask me, well, is this, who's this about, or is this based on so and so, or which house is the house that you're writing about? And the honest truth is that nothing in this book specifically came out of anything that I've experienced in Nashville. It's things from many years past. I mean, most of the action takes place a long time before I ever moved here. But the one thing in there that I did take from my life in Nashville is I modeled that teacher, Dean Varnado, on a colleague of mine who retired recently, who's sort of a legend in the languages department, a Latin teacher that, kind of had this sort of moral gravitas and this, this kind of, he just, when I first met him, I was like, this guy is like, there should be a movie about him, because he just sort of, he had this real elegance and kind of natural sense of, moral authority.
Oh yeah, he makes a great cameo.
Mhm.
Your friend must be very pleased.
I don't know if he's read it yet. I hope he will.
And I was thinking the same thing. I don't know Nashville that well, but I've been enough that I recognize neighborhoods and things. So it's an accurate layout of the city, I think, and historically things that have happened, the tornadoes and whatnot. But the truth is, this story could be happening anywhere, anywhere in the country, where there are class differences. And I think that's everywhere.
Yes. And I kind of wrestled with, whether or not to try to put it somewhere else. And I think initially kind of what made me decide to write it and set it in Nashville, aside from just, laziness, because I live here and, it wouldn't require me to go to the library or anything like that, was that I thought, Nashville kind of, it's misrepresented, I think, in many ways. Like, people who haven't been here and don't know people who live here or from here sort of have this, they just think of, country and Western music and all that kind of stuff, which really is, it's an important part of the city, but by far the biggest employer and the biggest wealth in this city for a long, long time has been in the healthcare industry. And the music industry is not even close to that. And there are a lot of old Southern fortunes here. And I thought, maybe it would be interesting to write a book that sort of shows, that Nashville actually is this kind of really interesting cosmopolitan place. It's not just, a place where country music gets made. But then, as you pointed out, what kind of came to me, and this is just purely accidental, I wasn't planning on this, but in reflecting over the ways in which our country has really struggled over the last couple of years, I realized that the tensions in this book, the class tensions, the political tensions, the ways in which individual lives and individual needs or choices kind of ripple out onto other people. I mean, it's a microcosm of our whole country, and can kind of be superimposed onto, almost any city where you go through a lot of change. That's the one thing about Nashville that I do think that is unique, is that the population growth here has been so exponential in the last 20 years, and it's going to continue to grow. It's just really, really growing fast, which is changing the political power here. And it's kind of exacerbated a tension between, the idea of let's not change too much. We don't want to end up like Atlanta, and, let's get into the 21st century. And a lot of the voices that are, saying that are people like me who were not born and raised here. And, the folks who were born and raised here are like, well, you're not from here. You shouldn't be telling us what our city's supposed to be like. And it feels a little bit like, political parties, and both political parties, in the United States right now have a tension between a kind of a new critical mass of younger or more activist participants that are like, this is where we should be going. And the old guard is like, oh, no, don't try to take our party away from us. And then, one party seems more representative of let's go backwards, and the other one's like, no, let's go forwards. And, bad things happen when people feel like they're losing control.
Right. And the stains, even on what appears, at least in the novel, what appears to be this righteous path. Somebody even refers to, if you don't want to see the sausage being made, and let's just say, again, I don't want to give any spoilers, but there's a whole lot of sausage stories to be told. And you do it all with such a subtle hand. I was in great admiration again at how you provide this kind of amazing time capsule of this country. Another favorite quote you had is the one after 9/11. Charlie says, "Nothing else mattered anymore. It hadn't mattered before either. We just didn't know any better." And I don't think I'm giving away plot there. Just that kind of realization of what a catastrophic event or something, terrifying that engages people in a different way, wakes them up. And it was really powerful. And I felt you did that to us several times over the course of the novel.
Thank you. I should say that much of the credit for the subtlety and the structure goes to our mutual friend, Kathy Porres.
Well, she's a master.
She is. So I could not, with a straight face, act like that was all me. Kathy Porres is the editor of this book, and she is as good as they come, and as good an editor as she is a human being, and she's as good a human being as I know. So I want to make sure it's understood that I can't take credit for everything, but Kathy really helped me to see how to do that, and push the sentences and the structure and peel back in the right places and push a little harder in the other ones. And I think that everything that's good in there, it certainly it owes a lot to the loving hands of other people.
Well, I second that vote on Kathy Porres there. In the intro, I made reference to, this being your version of the Gatsby type tale. And I kept thinking that by choosing a narrator like Charlie, by choosing first person and showing him to us warts and all, was a very smart choice because it kind of bought the ticket to be able to say and explore a lot of these really difficult topics that I think might have been hard to handle or told any other way. Was it always in first person? Is that?
I think that I understood that I wanted, to be able to make observations that would be difficult to make in a third person voice, and also to kind of, create a character who could stretch those observations and critiques in maybe a harsher, darker direction than I would personally. I started out, my first novel, Only Love Can Break Your Heart, one of the things that I think is, fair to say about my own writing there is that my narrator in that book is a really sweet person who is always looking for the best in people. And so I kind of thought, maybe I should just go in a different direction and write from the point of view of somebody who is not so sweet, who is maybe bitter and a little cynical and, a little harsher. As far as the Gatsby comparisons go, boy, it's incredibly flattering that people have, made that comparison, but I can honestly, I can swear on my soul, Jill, I never thought once about The Great Gatsby when I was conceiving this book or writing it, not a single time. And the book that I was thinking about was Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh. That was the one that really inspired me. But I think what I realized after that observation was made, first to me by Paula McLean, who I'm so grateful for giving me this, beautiful blurb on the book. And if anybody knows The Lost Generation, it's Paula, And once I thought about it, I was like, oh gosh, I didn't mean to do that, but I totally did that, right? I internalized it because it's a book I've read so many times. And I remember when I was younger deciding, okay, I'm going to read Gatsby again, and I'm going to underline every perfect sentence. And I had to stop after about the third page because I would have to underline the whole book. And it suddenly occurred to me, just how much that narrative I'd internalized. And, then I started thinking about how those themes, which are, most kind of popularly read and understood in Gatsby, because that's one of the great American novels, and it's probably of the so-called great American novels, the most widely read one because it's the shortest, and it's taught in high schools. Moby Dick might be the great American novel, but we both know we can count on one hand how many people we know who've read every word of Moby Dick, and if I count myself, that's probably you and me, right? But it's in Brideshead too, and it's in Great Expectations, and it's in Pride and Prejudice.
Absolutely.
And that sort of tension, the class tension, the issues of class, the ways in which one can be both kind of in love with this world and also really disillusioned by it at the same time. That's almost like the story of the novel, really. It's in Middlemarch. I mean, it's everywhere, and it's kind of humbling, but also reassuring to feel like there's still more ways to tell that story and more
Absolutely.
ways to write it.
I mean, it's the desire to be there, the desire to climb, and then the guilt and the bad karma for getting there, which brings me back to the whole notion of sometimes does the end justify the means? Because that whole idea, and I don't want to give anything away, but you have some really powerful thought-provoking examples of that, and you have it juxtaposed with that great quote about truth.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I'll tell you,
I think Charlie's journey is maneuvering between those two places.
Well, one of the things that really was on my mind when I started writing this book, and part of what I wanted to do is I wanted to write about, a person, a Republican in politics who would kind of get to the point where, he couldn't tolerate, the compromises that he had to make in order to do what he thought was the right thing. And it really started for me, and there's an allusion to this a reference to this at the end of the novel. Again, no spoilers. I won't say more about it, but it started for me after the Sandy Hook shootings. And I just remember, I was coaching wrestling at the time, and I'd found out when I was after practice, and I'd gotten in the car to drive home, and I was listening on the radio to NPR, and I became so overwhelmed with emotion that I had to stop the car. Like I really thought I was going to get into an accident. I mean, I was heaving, it just was awful, and got home and I couldn't believe it. And I thought, okay, finally, this is it, 20 beautiful little children, being gunned down in a school with their teachers sacrificing their lives trying to protect them. That's going to do it. That's going to be enough to finally get, the government to do something about, common sense gun legislation. And then nothing happened. Well, they tried, but it didn't get through. And I just thought, how hard it must have been, because I don't believe that, the people who, make these kind of lockstep decisions, are bad people intrinsically. I think they know that, if I don't go along with this, then I'm going to get, primaried or voted out of office, and then I can't do any good anymore. And so I really honestly imagined, people like, Bob Corker here in Tennessee, losing sleep over, like, at what point do I, is enough? At what point, does the ends no longer justify the means? And this was all before, Donald Trump got elected. And I don't really want to get into all of that, and I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but we've seen a lot of people that, going along with things that we know are just straight up not true. And I don't think it's because they're terrible people. Some of them are not so good, but most of them are, that's what they're telling themselves, that the ends justify the means.
Well, and that's the innocence of Charlie, because Charlie is doing what his mother wants him to do. Mm-hmm. And, at that point, as a ninth grader, he's accepting these gifts, wanting to believe it's because he has some talent or something right about him that distinguishes him. So that's where my sympathy for Charlie is there, with the kid, who doesn't know anything about his dad. Sure. There are a lot of reasons to feel for him. And also we see him getting pulled in. And so as the reader, we're saying, oh no, don't go there. But at the same time, you also understand the lure of his wanting to make something of his life. And more so, that's where his mother, I think, really came in. Mm-hmm. She wants to do for him. He wants to please her. And there's that early.
And I think that in both cases, both, with the mother Bonnie and with Charlie, if you look at that, both, through the kind of the innocent, naive eyes of the child, just sort of, going along with and becoming absorbed in and sort of assuming that, the people who occupy this world of privilege are always right and are always, they sort of deserve to be in charge, and also looking at it from an adult perspective, understanding why people would go along with that in the first place. I sympathize with that. I sympathize with Bonnie as a girl who is a naive teenager, thinks, all that matters is that, I keep my baby, and then, maybe one day my boyfriend's going to come back from Vietnam, and then he never comes back. And, 10 years later, she's, waiting tables. And then all of a sudden she, sees an opportunity to, give her son a leg up in life. I can see Charlie. I've been there. I've been that guy who has, kind of kept his mouth shut or, gone along with things that I didn't like very much or wasn't really sure was right, or maybe, should have known better, but kind of thought were okay because these older guys that I thought were cool that were kind of putting their arm around me and saying, come on, man, and looking back on it all, I'm kind of like, boy, I really wish that I'd, had a little more integrity back then. But I all I wanted was to fit in and to be accepted.
And don't we all? I mean, there's the universal story. And I think we're going to call Talia so that I realize I've sat here and talked.
Oh, this is so good.
But there's
I just could listen to you talk.
In this novel, I can imagine book groups, having loads of questions and lengthy conversation. What a pleasure.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to pose any audience questions. If anybody has anything that they would like to ask Ed or Jill, just type it in the comments or the chat, or use the ask a question feature, and I will get those read out. So we're going to start with a question from Marlene, who I believe you answered this to an extent, but she said, I was wondering whether the story is purely from your imagination and or research, or some from life experiences. I know you said the Nashville scene is not necessarily based on real bits of Nashville, but how would you say your life experiences have informed your telling of this story?
That's a great question. And I think that, my answer to that is, what I think about, life experiences and trying to write fiction, what I think a good fiction writer can do or may do is, you figure out how to kind of repurpose your life experiences in a different context, and maybe with a different, set of facts, but it's basically the same, like it's like a true story, but it's so embellished or so repurposed that it doesn't resemble where it came from anymore. And then you maybe even forget, where you got the idea. But what I want is, to take these sort of moments of conscience or epiphanies or crisis or regrets or memories or things that I love, and I want to make people feel the way they made me feel. But if I just told you a true story, you wouldn't feel the way that I felt. And so if I take it and I, recontextualize it, maybe peel it back a little bit. Sometimes the truth is actually more outrageous than what I write in my novels. And sometimes it's, I'm embellishing and kind of pushing it out there a little bit, just to make it feel, to put the emotion on the page so that, both when I write it, can feel that. And also hopefully when somebody reads it, that they'll, feel the emotions and maybe reflect on things. The most gratifying thing that's happened to me as a writer is to meet people or be contacted by people who've read something that I wrote and said that they, saw something in their lives, kind of reflected back to them, or that it made them think about their relationships with, people that they care about, or kind of face down some, some memories or experience catharsis over things that, they struggle with. And, I don't take any credit for that. I really think that it's just kind of, the way stories kind of take on a life of their own. And
I think you're allowed to take some credit for it.
I do too.
Y'all are nice. I think that, I just, it's really humbling, especially when people, really connect personally to something that, for us as writers is just, pretty private when we're putting it down on the page, but then you get it out to an audience and somebody that you've never met, tells you, this book really meant a lot to me because it helped me to cope with this, that, or the other, or think about something and experience a kind of self-recognition, which I think is kind of, for me, what I read for. I think novels for me are all about, seeing myself more clearly through the way that I relate to or react to what I read. And it makes me more human, I hope. And if I can give that gift to anybody else, then, it will have been well worth it.
Mm-hmm. I'm actually curious. So if the novel isn't necessarily inspired by life experiences, but you write it with the goal of self-recognition,
right.
when you've gone back and read The Fortunate Ones, which characters or which experiences do you recognize yourself in?
Oh, gosh.
Good question, Ty.
I mean, everyone where somebody behaved badly, I recognize myself in. I don't know. I mean, all of them. I maybe most sharply in the moments that deal with race and racism, because I feel like, so many of us are kind of, becoming aware of something, just, I wrote something recently about this, about, the ways in which a lot of us are sort of raised completely oblivious to how, still saturated our culture is with, the bigotry and white supremacy. And, for instance, I grew up in Virginia, and until the year 2000, Martin Luther King Day was Lee Jackson King Day. They celebrated the births of Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson on the same day as Martin Luther King. And if you grew up in Virginia the way I did, where Robert E. Lee until very recently was treated as a secular saint, you would never think twice about this. And you would never go back and do the research and discover that, like a lot of things, a lot of the symbolism of the Old South and the Confederacy, those things were specifically, intended to be a kind of, middle finger to the federal government for, forcing them to have these holidays that, acknowledge the bad things that had happened in the South in the past. And, I don't think that people should be condemned for, being products of their time. But I think when the truth becomes clear, you got to stand up and acknowledge it and not try to pretend like it isn't what it is. And so, that's kind of, and I kind of wanted to write about that in the novel. I wanted to write about, how this sort of passive, casual bigotry was just such a normal thing in, the culture of, especially the South, but I think everywhere in America. And now we're kind of realizing, man, we are still dealing with the baggage of that, and that if we don't really, confront that in a meaningful way, we're never going to get where we need to be, to have, some peace and consensus. If that makes
Absolutely. Where you do that beautifully in the novel is, when, is it Jamie? I forget now, who makes the comment about Charlie's shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the kind of thing as an adolescent that would just absolutely devastate you, to have someone point out you're wearing cheap shoes, or I know I can see through you. But then to translate that to the adult world and racial issues, where someone is always, cast in a certain path. It just, and you do that. You get that. You make that point on the page. I think from his adolescent experiences, time and time, I felt they translated to these bigger universal truths that he doesn't even understand yet. He's on his way. We hope.
Well, that actually has happened to me. That's an example of something that happened to me in real life that I repurposed. I had a pair of cheap cowboy boots, and this friend of mine said to me, he's like, "Yeah, I like you, Ed, but your boots suck." And I could have died, and I went out and spent a bunch of money on a new pair of boots the next day. So I know how that feels.
Yeah.
All right. Any other audience questions?
Oh, I'm good.
I see a couple comments of people saying very interesting and this is awesome, but I'm not seeing other questions at the moment. Can you talk a little bit about how, I know obviously books are written well before they're published, but can you talk a little bit about how you've been influenced by current events of the past, let's say 10 years going into writing this?
Well, I started this in 2016, really before that, probably I've been kind of batting it around for a couple of years. And then, I kind of committed to it in 2016 early. And, I knew I was going to be writing about politics, but I had no expectation whatsoever. Just like everybody else, I believed the polls, and I didn't, when I was sitting there on election night in 2016, watching, Donald Trump, like win the presidency, I was just kind of like, just like everybody else. and not only was I, shocked for, political reasons, but I was also like, oh my God, like politics in America just got like way crazier than anything that I could be writing in fiction. And the things that I thought I was writing about that were kind of scandalous and crazy are like nothing compared to what we're actually living with right now. I might have to write another book. But then as time passed, and my consciousness of all of these things began to evolve. I thought, well, maybe this will be okay. And then as we got, to where we are today, I felt kind of affirmed in what I was doing, that, intentionally or accidentally, things were kind of moving in a way that the themes that I was dealing with, were being kind of drawn into the light, and that people it might land at a time when people were searching for, a story that would, prompt reflection on these things that, we're all seeing in the news. But, the news is not a great place to get context and nuance and understand the complexity of human experience. That's not, nobody reads novels, to learn facts about history, and nobody should read the news to learn about humanity. And what you get when you read a novel is a chance to see those dramas played out both in the interior lives of the characters and in the things that, the novelist can show you that maybe you already knew but had not yet been able to articulate for yourself. So it ended up being something that worked out pretty well. More recently, I think, everyone, like, this thing, Jill brought up the scene in the novel where Charlie, talks about his experience of 9/11. And, that was the same thing. I had just started graduate school when that happened. And I just thought, oh gosh, this, Walker Percy, Richard Ford type novel I want to write just doesn't seem very important anymore. And I had some real doubts about, the merits of what I was doing. Now I don't have those doubts anymore. I believe that we need novels in times of crisis probably more than ever, and not as distractions, but as ways to help us, keep our humanity and get, more, strengthen ourselves to go back out there into the world and deal with these very real and present problems. But we're going through a thing like this right now with the COVID pandemic. And of course, with the disruptions and the real, serious fears about the stability of our government that we've all experienced. It is a crisis time. And I think a lot of writers right now are probably struggling with, like, how do I keep writing this, domestic novel that I was working on when, COVID is happening and there's this terrible things happening. And so that weighs on me just like it weighs on everybody else. And I don't blame anybody who's having a hard time getting any work done right now. But I do want to say that, I do believe that domestic novel still matters. The novel about your mother still matters. The novel about, the crisis of a family dealing with, illness or anything else that doesn't seem like it has to, it doesn't have like the grand scope of history and doesn't involve a pandemic or post-apocalypse or something like that. Those things still matter as much as they ever did.
Even those moments of moral or human failure, character failure, like with his friendship with Terrence early on. I think most everyone is haunted by, some regret in that way, where you either said something you wish you hadn't said, or you didn't say what you wish you had said.
I think for me, the most, haunting moments are the ones that are on the smallest scale, which is exactly what Bill's talking about.
Absolutely.
I have a kind of related question. So you've just talked about writing about the small scale, even when things are crazy, like how we've all felt about dealing with COVID. I have a question from Cameron, which is, have either of you been able to write during COVID? and will you deal with COVID in future books, or what are other projects that you're working on if not?
Jill, you first. I want to know
Well,
what you're working on.
I am able to write. I mean, I think it is a distraction. And I think that my writing life is the one thing that hasn't changed during COVID, because you go in a room all by yourself. And, that part hasn't changed. The rewards that come after a long day writing has changed. You can't just go to the movies, which is where I would be.
Yeah.
I hear you. I have been working, relatively steadily, but I would say that my interruptions really haven't been about COVID. They've really been more about, a lot of big things happening in my life. I got married in the summer. It was awesome. We had a little small. Thank you. We had a COVID wedding. It was beautiful and memorable, and I couldn't be happier. But that was more important to me than writing. And, I was at the time, most of the writing I was doing was love poems for my beautiful wife, brilliant, beautiful wife, I should say. And then lately I've been busy doing this and doing all the stuff related to, trying to hopefully, get folks to read this book and love it. I think eventually I might write something that touches on COVID, but I think right now, the book I'm working on right now is set, it starts in the 1940s, and I don't. I think that probably there will be a great COVID novel eventually, but I think that it's a mistake. I feel like for me, you need a little distance on things before you can really digest exactly what it all meant to you. I know we're all a little stir crazy, and we're all kind of, my wife and I were talking the other day about boy, when we finally are able to go hang out with friends and do something, we're not going to know how to do it. We're going to all be like, how do you have a conversation with people, and so those things I think, will take some time, but I'm sure that there's, some 25-year-old phenom who's currently writing, the COVID novel that's going to blow all of our minds. But I'm the type of person that needs to let things simmer on the stove for a while before I try to make sense of them.
I don't think readers will blame you for that. I think most people are probably happy
over COVID.
happy to not read about COVID for at least a while.
Yeah,
All right, and let's do one last question. This is pretty specific for folks who have read the book, so it's a no spoiler zone, but Shirley has asked if you could talk a little bit about the Mexico episode in the book and how that fits into the novel, and why it took that sort of diversion from the Nashville part.
Well, the straight answer, the first answer is that I wrote a lot of the book in San Miguel de Allende. Probably about 100 pages when I was spending some extended time there in the summer a few years ago, and it's such a beautiful place, and I really, really love it. But it's also kind of a weird place because there's so many expatriates and the one thing I don't like about San Miguel de Allende is that I can't improve my Spanish when I'm there because everybody speaks English. There's so many Americans there that or U.S. Americans that you don't. I start trying to speak in Spanish when I go around town, and people immediately start talking to me in English. I'm like, please, no, your Spanish is terrible. Just let me talk in English. But it's kind of a weird little place, and so I thought, boy, I want to write about the beauty of this place and also kind of, give a little bit of a window into the peculiar culture of it. But in terms of the larger context of the novel, I felt like, I wanted there to be a big choice for Charlie where, you would be able to understand just how powerful his investment is in this idea of Arch and Vanessa and the world of Nashville, being necessary to his sense of self and his idea that he can't really truly exist without their affirmation and being close to them, that he'd be willing to literally move, back from another country where he was happy and successful, and life was almost kind of Edenic, and just you just kind of living the dream down there, and you would have to understand the power of that attraction to him, combined with his need to reconcile with his mother, would make him. He really comes back for his mother, but he stays because he just can't let go of these people, and
Right.
That's why I did that.
And I'll add to that what takes him there in the beginning is an influential teacher who had shown an interest in him. So it wasn't like he just flew off on his own either.
No.
He's still very carefully keeping himself under someone's wing.
He's desperate for the approval of authority figures.
Yeah.
That is very authentic to my personality.
I think Bob is in the house if you want to talk.
Oh, is he? Yeah. We were talking earlier. Jill is a dear friend of my mentor from grad school, Bob Coaches, who's a brilliant writer and an awesome human being who's had a great influence on me in both practical and spiritual ways, and I miss him and his wife Catfish dearly. I hope to see him soon once this stuff is over.
All this
Love him very
stuff.
much. Yeah.
Somebody just asked if we got snow in Chapel Hill. In Hillsborough, we got about
A little bit.
1/16 of an inch.
Enough to close
not enough.
virtual school, apparently.
No, it didn't stick, unfortunately. I was hoping for a little cozy snow day, work from home day today, but I came in instead. All right, so we are going to wrap up. Just want to give a few quick reminders. If you'd like to purchase a signed copy of The Fortunate Ones from Flyleaf, you can click the link below our faces. If you missed some of the conversation tonight, or you'd like to share it with a friend, you can share the recording. It will, as soon as we wrap up, you can refresh your page and it will appear as a video that you can share out. It's the same link. And then finally, please do remember to check our Crowdcast profile if you're interested in any future Flyleaf events. We really appreciate seeing you all. I know we only really see your names, but it feels like community, and it's something that I really value, and I'm just looking forward to seeing all of your names in future events, and eventually in person again, hopefully. All right. Thank you so much, Ed and Jill. It's been such a delight seeing
Thanks,
you.
Tanya.
talking to you
Congratulations, Ed. It's been
Thank
a
you.
real pleasure.
Oh,
Yeah.
Jill, it's been a pleasure for me and such an honor. And I just want to say thank you to Jill. She is just so awesome to do this. And also thank you, Talia and Flyleaf and folks out there. Support your local independent bookstore. They need you. We got to keep these places alive so we can keep this thing going. And I'm very grateful to Jamie and Talia and everybody at Flyleaf for all they've done for me and all they're doing for all of us, because we need these places. So
Absolutely.
go buy a book. Buy mine if you want, but buy
They
somebody's.
keep us all going, for sure.
Thank y'all so much. We really appreciate it.
Okay.
All right. Thank you to everyone
Bye.
watching. Have a good night.
Thanks so much.